Welcome to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us today. Our guest, Robert Garcia, Vice Mayor of the city of Long Beach. And I thought we'd have some fun and talk to the Vice Mayor about the recent election. I think it's fair to say in California, the Democrats did, pretty well. Quite a landslide.
Well.
Quite a landslide on all levels. President Obama got over 60% of the vote. The Democrats took 2/3 in both the Senate and the Assembly with a margin.
Right.
It's not as if they're right at 2/3. Picked up seats no one ever expected they'd pick up. 3 Republican members of the Congress lost. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly it was a Democratic year, no question about it, and not just in California, obviously, but throughout the country. At the very top of the ticket, you had President Obama. When you look at how the popular vote broke down and the state-by-state vote, he did well. I mean, he had a good margin. He won the swing states he needed to win.
And let's talk about that, because in the final analysis, it looks as if President Obama will win the popular vote by about 4 points.
Right.
That's more than George Bush beat John Kerry in 2004. Yet throughout the entire cycle, we, and I include myself, were talking as if this was going to be a close race, a photo finish. Did we just read it wrong?
Well, I think a lot of things. I think, first of all, the polling, particularly the polling on the Republican side, was showing a different electorate that would be voting.
Right.
And I think people underestimated the Obama vote that happened back in 2008. The young people, new voters, they came back out, and they came back out in numbers in a big way that was reminiscent of 2008, and in some groups even larger than.
And I want to talk about that. When you look at voters of color, minority groups, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, Jewish Americans, they all voted for President Obama by over 70% of the vote. Asian Americans, that was a rock solid Republican group 10, 20 years ago.
Right.
What has happened?
Well, I think, first of all, what's happened is actually quite sad in the United States. And I think what we have essentially is one party that does not look like all of America. And I think that's a problem that we should all be concerned about. And I think, I have a lot of really great Republican friends and who are
Sure you do.
Who are good people. I mean, and they love this country just as much as I believe as anybody does. But I think something's happened along the way, and I think the Republican Party right now is trying to think about what can they do to change the way their party addresses issues that are important to ethnic communities. And I think they need to do that.
And on the other side, what can the Democrats do? I know that you're a Democrat, to solidify the gains they have made over the last few years.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, what President Obama and the Democrats have done well is they've focused on the middle class. They've focused on ensuring that there's a fair taxation policy. I think the other thing that the Democrats have keyed in on, which is extremely important, is this idea that we need to respect everyone, regardless of who they are, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their religious conviction or belief. It's a party for everybody.
I want to talk to you about candidates who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual that won in 2012. In Arizona, a candidate who identifies herself as a bisexual woman was successful in Congress.
Kristen Sinema.
Right. In Wisconsin, a lesbian woman became the United States Senator, defeating a popular governor, former Governor Tommy Thompson.
Right. Tammy Baldwin.
In California, a gay Asian man won in the Inland Empire and won in a walk. Mark Takano.
Mark Takano, former teacher.
Former teacher. This is a sea change, if you ask me, sir.
Well, first of all, I think it should not be lost on anybody that Tammy Baldwin, who won in Wisconsin, is now the first openly gay member of the United States Senate.
Right.
And I think that is actually quite historic, not just for the LGBT community, but certainly for the country. I mean, she has really broken a barrier in Wisconsin, not just for openly gay people, but for women. She's the first United States female senator from Wisconsin as well. And so I think that's a historic turning point for the country. Also, on election night that November, we had 4 marriage equality measures passed in the country.
And let's talk about that, because it is the first time in the history of our union that gay marriage rights passed via an election.
Right.
I think the gay rights forces have been 0-32, is that right?
Right.
But in, help me out, Washington State, Colorado,
Maine, Maryland,
right? Oh yeah, Washington,
Minnesota,
and exactly. And 3 of those were affirmative votes, legalizing gay marriage. As we speak today, the first set of gay marriages are occurring in Washington State.
Right.
What does that mean to you? You identify yourself as a gay man. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it means what a lot of people kind of already have figured out, and that this is really just civil rights moving forward in the way it should. I think that America, California in particular, has kind of rediscovering the fact that yes, gay people are everywhere. They're not going to hurt anybody. They're your family, they're your friends, they're your neighbors, and that we have to support them and ensure that everyone is treated the same. So, particularly when it comes to civil law. I mean, religious institutions have absolutely every right to do whatever they'd like to do. Now, I'm a Catholic. I'm a proud Catholic.
Right.
I mean, I agree with everything with my church, but all the time. But you know, the church has a right to do what they want to do. But so do governments, and I think that's what's important.
Speaking of governments, the Human Rights Campaign put out a research paper that looked at municipalities and their policies towards gays and lesbians. I think they looked at 50 large cities, medium cities, small cities. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And on all state capitals.
And all state capitals. Long Beach was one of those cities. How did Long Beach do?
Well, this is something we're very proud of in Long Beach. I mean, Long Beach scored only one of 11 cities to score 100%, which is basically 100 points out of the entire study. And so, of all the cities that were looked at, there was about 140 cities that were looked at total. We were one of 11. Other cities in that group were San Diego and San Francisco and Boston, some others.
Los Angeles?
Los Angeles as well.
Sacramento?
Sacramento was not 100.
No. Close?
No.
We'll
I
check.
think they were up there.
Yeah, we'll check.
But what we have essentially is the HRC, which is really a well-known, obviously probably the most well-known kind of human rights organization in the country, put out this equality index where they asked a series of over 40 questions, so 40 measurements. Everything from does the city offer domestic worker benefits, family leave, is there a equal benefits ordinance, has the voting body gone on record to support marriage equality, a series of questions. Long Beach was one of these 11 cities to score a perfect score. And I think what that says about Long Beach is two things. One, I think everyone acknowledges that Long Beach has a very large LGBT population. And so the city has been proactive, not just government, but the city leaders, community activists, business owners in supporting that population. Second, I think it just shows that Long Beach at the end of the day is a very supportive city of everybody. And we have been responsive in ensuring that people are treated the way that every American deserves to be treated.
So do you think when we look back in the history books that 2012 will be seen as the year that the electorate changed its mind and decided to grant equal rights to members of the LGBT community?
I think that 2012 is definitely a watershed year for equality, but 2013 is going to be an even probably bigger year for equality. Because what's going to happen, and we'll, as you know, we're in the middle of doing this, is the Supreme Court is currently making decisions right now about what's going to happen with Proposition 8, as well as the Defense of Marriage Act, and how that will look in court. This summer is going to be really some federal guidelines.
At the same time, now that the Democrats control 2/3 of the Assembly and the Senate, there is discussion about whether the legislature should address Proposition 8 on its own. Try to reverse it, although I presume they'd have to go back to the voters. What do you think about that? Is it time to look at Prop 8 legislatively and electorally, or is it best to let's just see what the Supreme Court does first?
Well, I think that right now, I think it's in everyone's best interest to see what the Supreme Court does. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, I think, regardless. So I think we're all kind of anticipating that. But I do believe that regardless of the makeup of the court, civil rights for gay and lesbian Americans is going to always move forward. Regardless of the setbacks, human history has shown that we have always erred on the side of civil rights and human rights. Sometimes it takes longer than we'd like it to, but it'll get there.
So what do you think the Supreme Court does?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I think that the Supreme Court likely will make changes to DOMA, either strike down the Defense of Marriage Act, and then we'll also probably support the lower courts on Prop 8 and validate that and allow gay marriages to happen in California.
That's a stunning development if it happens.
It would be quite stunning.
His name is Robert Garcia. He is the Vice Mayor of the City of Long Beach. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
Which state was the first to legalize same-sex marriage? Connecticut, Iowa, Massachusetts, or Vermont? Massachusetts became the first state to legalize same-sex marriage in 2004.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We continue our conversation about election 2012. We are joined by Kevin Wallsten. He's a professor of political science at Cal State Long Beach. And sir, you told me a fact that blew me away. In 2008, 157 people retweeted Barack Obama's victory tweet. In 2012, how many?
Better than 700,000. Yeah.
Which seems a little low if you ask me, given what Twitter is. But it is amazing to think that in 4 short years, Twitter has exploded to that extent.
Yeah, absolutely it has. And I mean, if you go back 4 years, actually, Obama's followers were much smaller, obviously,
right.
Much fewer. There were far fewer people on Twitter. And now, if you look at the just number of messages on Twitter, on a daily basis, there are over 400 million messages out there on Twitter. Now, I think you suggest something important, which is 700,000 does seem a little low. If you have 400 million tweets and only 700 retweeting the president. Politics is certainly an important part of Twitter, but it's not actually the dominant thing going on Twitter.
And I do want to talk to you about that, because I will post, for example, these interviews online and then put a link in my Twitter feed. And I will put the name of the elected official. And they will get notification that I have posted this link. And as I mentioned to you, I would say about 5% of the elected officials with whom I have tweeted about retweet. It's surprising to me. Not that I'm, all that, but still, it's free press.
Right. Maybe they're nervous that you're going to ask them the hard questions.
Yeah, it's me.
Actually, the use of Twitter by politicians is sort of an interesting thing. I mean, it's not entirely clear they know how to use it yet. It is a fairly new medium. Now, the vast majority of people running for office actually use Twitter now, but they don't use it in the way that I think a lot of people who run Twitter, who envision Twitter, or who imagine that Twitter is going to transform democratic politics would hope that they use it.
Well, let's talk about transforming democratic politics, big D or little d.
Yeah.
Because one could argue it transformed big D politics in 2012.
Yeah.
One could argue that Barack Obama was successful in 2012 because of social media. Mm-hmm. Are you one of those who's arguing such?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was the definitive factor in him winning the election. I think actually the election was a very good election for the way in which political scientists happen to think about elections, which is that they're driven primarily by fundamental kinds of factors like the economy, which is not a political science perspective, but this idea that the economy is really the primary determinant of elections. This election was a good sort of election for that point of view.
Couldn't one argue that the economy should have played against Barack Obama?
Yeah, you could argue that. I think that's actually a misreading of the evidence in history. Now people have all sorts of their favorite statistics. No president has ever won re-election with an unemployment rate above 7.5%. For instance, we have an unemployment rate better than 7.5%. So how is Obama winning? It turns out that voters are actually very, very short-term thinkers. They don't hold economic performance during the first 3 years against the president, sort of a what have you done for me lately? And it turns out
this year wasn't that bad.
Was not that bad for Obama. Things were trending in the right direction. It is not the absolute level of economic indicators that matter. It's the trend.
But let's talk more about this whole social media phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's fair to say that the turnout amongst younger voters was much higher than anticipated, much higher than the Romney campaign anticipated.
Yeah.
In fact, in California, we understand that turnout amongst voters under 30 was 7 points higher than it was in 2008.
Yeah.
That's a stunning number. Was it in part because the Obama campaign so effectively used Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it may be?
Yeah, so the Obama campaign was very effective at mobilizing young voters. The problem historically with mobilizing young voters has been, or not historically, but in the last couple of years, has been that they're hard to get in touch with.
Right.
So the vast majority of them don't have a landline, and you don't know what their cell phone number is. So, a lot of the ways in which campaigns get people to the polls is just by getting in touch with them, showing up at their door, sending them an email message, or, and sort of giving them a phone call. But the Obama campaign was very successful at sort of tracking these people down online, and so recently they've been sort of trotting this number out that they were able to get in touch with 5 million people, 18 to 29, who are on Facebook that otherwise would have gone without hearing.
And these
somebody.
were not Obama friends on Facebook. These were friends of friends?
Friends of friends, yeah. So this is sort of one step removed, right? It's not all that exciting if somebody sort of seeks you out and becomes your friend on Facebook. But what is really exciting from the perspective of the Obama campaign, at least, is they were able to sort of mine some of this data that's there.
Here's my question. You know, there's that famous line, I'm not a member of any organized party, I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
So what happened to the Republicans? They're supposed to be the organized ones, the ones that kind of dot their I's and cross their T's.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I guess old stereotypes die hard, but they do die.
Right.
You know, I think that what you've seen since 2004 certainly has been the Democrats taking very seriously the idea of not necessarily social media, but instead the idea that data should drive campaign strategy. So they have made a concerted effort, very successful effort, at gathering data, analyzing it using social science techniques, and using that to come up with strategies that are very effective at mobilizing groups like young voters who have been historically hard to reach.
It's that micro-targeting that seemed to have been so effective. Another interesting point, and I heard this word once before, it's homophily.
Sure, yeah.
And it's a word that seems to be getting more play as we march through the 21st century. What is homophily, and how does it apply to social media and political campaigns?
Yeah, it's a fancy new word.
I like
it. But it reflects something sort of old, you know, sort of common human motivation to associate with people who share something in common with us.
We're tribal.
We're very tribal. That's exactly what this word is designed to capture. Now, you know, the tendency towards being tribal in a way is, you know, sort of contingent upon us being able to sort of realize that. Now, what the new media environment has done is it has allowed all of us to express our views, and it allows us to sort of segregate ourselves out or cocoon ourselves in these sort of little online areas where we only have to associate with people who share our political dispositions. Now, the studies have been worried about homophily. It's been sort of this specter.
Well, is it the Fox News MSNBC effect?
Exactly, yeah. So that's the cable news component of it. And there's this concern that this may be driving some of the polarization that people imagine is going on. And, you know, online politics certainly has a tendency to sort of exacerbate this.
And what's also interesting is in traditional media, as a general proposition, we can't get away with misstatements. We can't get away with extreme hyperbole. On the internet, I mean, there's so much out there. You can say virtually anything, and it can go viral, you know, in a flash. I mean, I remember during the recent Gaza conflict, there was a picture swirling around of this allegedly Palestinian child that had been wounded or killed, and it wound up being a Syrian child from the Syrian conflict, and yet the entire Arab world had been convinced that this was a Palestinian child killed by the Israelis.
Sure. Yeah, and you know, there is no fact-checking mechanism. Now the retort to that would be that you know, many people who are on Twitter, certainly the blogosphere, its origins going back to 2001, 2002, they imagine themselves to actually be the watchers of the media itself. Yeah, that's how some people view that. And you know, you are right that there is this, I think, tendency for misinformation that is somehow made worse by the fact that information travels very quickly
so fast.
And on Twitter, because so many reporters now are on Twitter, it's sort of a professional responsibility.
And let me ask you about that, because yes, I am on Twitter, and there's this view that we in the media, the traditional media, are being driven by Twitter. I don't know. I mean, I definitely follow and maybe I get ideas, but are we really being dragged by Twitter?
I think that's the big question in a way, is to try to sort out where, and this is an old question, where reporters get their information from. And a lot of people embrace the rise of new media because there was this sort of long-standing concern that maybe elites have too much influence over reporters. Well, an elected official, for instance, or somebody who's employed in, you know, sort of politics as their primary vocation.
Okay, his name is Kevin Wallsten. His Twitter handle is
nothing. I'm not on Twitter.
How interesting. We'll have to talk about that next time. My Twitter handle is @Pomerance. I thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Mike Gardner, member of the Riverside City Council, about a hot political issue that was in the news this year, separation of church and state. I'm Pomerance. You're watching Charter California Edition.
In 2012, the Obama campaign spent how much more money on social media than the Romney campaign? 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, or 20 times? The Obama campaign spent 10 times more money on social media than the Romney campaign in 2012.
This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Glad you're with us today. Our guest is Mike Gardner. He's a member of the Riverside City Council, and it happens quite often, contention over religious symbols on public lands. And today here in the city of Riverside, there is some contention over a cross, a Christian cross on Mount Rubidoux, which is a beautiful mountain, and the cross is quite majestic, but there are some concerns about it. Could you explain the background, sir?
Well, the cross, the original cross was wooden. The current cross is cement and steel.
Mm-hmm.
The original cross was placed 105 years ago, in 1907, by Frank Miller, who was a local hotelier, owned the Mission Inn, which is very famous in the city.
Of course.
And Mr. Miller owned Mount Rubidoux. And
Wow, lucky him.
Yeah.
Right.
Over his lifetime, he placed a number of things on the mountain. There's a peace tower, there's a friendship bridge, there are a number of plaques and monuments to a variety of people, but he placed a cross in 1907, excuse me, in honor of Father Serra, who founded the missions,
Of course.
part of California's history.
Of course. So let's fast forward. So he passes away, and what happens to the land and the cross?
Well, in 1955, the Miller family donated the entire mountain with the cross and the Peace Tower and all the other mountains, all the other monuments, to the city as a park. And they had a clause in the deed that the city had to maintain the cross and the Peace Tower and the other monuments, and had to forever be a memorial park to Frank Miller.
Now, in 1955, that may have been fine, but there has been a different view promulgated over the last few decades that there should be no, I mean, we've always had a separation of church and state, but the notion that a public land should have a religious symbol on it, that has become somewhat taboo.
There have been challenges increasingly over the years. Actually, in 1954, the words "under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance. And in 1955,
are a bit schizophrenic when it comes to our approach and our intersection of faith and government.
In 1955, I don't think anyone would have anticipated that there would be an issue about a cross on a mountain that had been given to the city.
But through some legal permutations and detours, what exactly happened with, there's something called a reversionary clause. Explain that element.
The reversionary clause was in the deed of the mountain to the city, and it required that the cross and all the other features remain on the mountain.
Okay.
But under California law, reversionary clauses that are recorded must be re-recorded within 30 years or they lapse.
And that happened.
And that did, it was not re-recorded.
Is that the city's
fault? So
fault?
it has lapsed. No, it actually is the grantor, the Miller family,
So
who
what
would
does
need
that
to do the
mean?
re-recording. Means that the cross could be taken down, or in fact the mountain could be sold.
Very interesting.
And not revert to the Miller family.
But here we are today, and there are conflicting legal decisions on the issue of crosses on public lands, or let's just say religious symbols on public lands. But what we do know is that in August of 2012, an organization called Americans United for the Separation of Church and State contacted the city of Riverside and indicated that they would bring litigation if the city did not either remove the cross or divest itself of the cross.
Correct.
A bit of a shock to the system, I'm sure.
It wasn't really a surprise that it came. We've seen a number of these cases nationwide, and here in Southern California, there have been several recent ones. Or the south half of the state. There's been San Francisco.
And what's so interesting is the cases have provided differing results. In Ventura, for example, I believe that there was a sale to the highest bidder, and that was upheld. But yet in San Diego, there was a sale, and that was considered a sham sale. And
The difference was in Ventura, it truly was an arm's length transaction. It was whoever the highest bidder was,
Right.
regardless of what they intended to do with the cross. The city offered for sale a half-acre underlying the cross and the cross itself. And as it happened, the group that purchased it wanted to retain it. But it could have been a group that wanted to remove the cross. That was not challenged. So that seems to be a viable path to.
But the San Diego transaction was challenged.
In San Diego, there was a specific negotiation with a group that wanted to preserve the cross, and that was the intent of the San Diego City Council, was to find a group that would preserve the cross.
So that's why it was seen as a sham.
Yes.
So Riverside is presented with some options. You could litigate this matter.
You could.
And I'm a lawyer. I'm not going to hypothecate on what would happen, but it's a tough case.
It's a very tough case.
You could remove the cross and
could.
just move on, or you could divest. You could do a swap, or whatever you would want to do. As we speak today, has Riverside made a decision about what it wants to do?
It has not. We're continuing to do some additional legal research. We had one city council hearing looking at alternatives. There was a staff recommendation that.
Is that public, the staff recommendation?
Yes.
And what was their recommendation?
Their recommendation was that the city sell almost half an acre, 0.43 acres, underlying the cross and the cross to the highest bidder in an arm's length sale.
Okay.
Many citizens came out on both sides, but predominantly on the we would like to save the cross, maintain it.
But can you? But it's tricky. I mean, if you sell it to the highest bidder, but you make sure the highest bidder maintains the cross,
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
You can't. That would be a sham sale. The people who came and spoke raised several issues. They cited some court cases that the staff had not specifically cited. They suggested that there were some legal entities that would help represent the city. So basically, we're looking for more information. We will make a decision likely in January.
Has Mike Gardner taken a position?
Mike Gardner cannot take a position as council member because if I express a position that we should do
X, Y, or
this
Z.
for that
Right.
reason, it sets up the possibility that the courts would find a sham transaction if we elect to sell the property.
So what's remarkable about this is you have people that are very passionate about this, and I understand that. I guess what my concern would be is cities have gone bankrupt because of litigation. I mean, Mammoth Lakes went bankrupt as a result of litigation. There are cities out there that are losing millions of dollars defending medical marijuana lawsuits. I mean, it can be very noble to defend a position, but in the final analysis, you are a fiduciary, I think. I don't know if legally you're a fiduciary, but you're a fiduciary, and so it becomes very dicey in terms of, agreeing to litigation.
Yeah, litigating certainly has risks, and because of the nature of the case, it would not be settled at trial court. It would have to go through the appellate courts, Ninth Circuit in our case, and ultimately potentially to the U.S. Supreme Court.
And I think it's fair to say that the Ninth Circuit is likely to rule in favor of a position separating church and state. I mean, they are notoriously known, and I don't say that pejoratively, but they are known for taking positions separating.
I think that's probably correct.
Right.
And a significant thing on litigation is the losing side pays the attorney's fees, the legal costs of the successful side.
Are descendants of Frank Miller still with us?
There are some.
And are they involved in this, or?
Kind of distantly, both physically and, they don't seem to have an interest in taking back the property even if the reversionary clause were valid.
Really?
The closest physical relative that I'm aware of is in Boise, Idaho.
So they're no descendants
They're not
in
in
the area.
Riverside, and they're pretty distant relatives.
Right. It's got to be a very tricky situation because, look, we are a diverse nation, but we do know that some people feel very strongly about the nation's Christian heritage. And so it's tough. I don't know if I envy you on this one.
It's not going to be an easy choice. We really do have the three choices. We can litigate, we can take down the cross, or we can do an arm's length sale.
I'm glad you came to talk about this. Come back. I want to hear what happens.
Great.
Okay.
Thank
His
you.
name is Mike Gardner. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.